The Federal Student Aid Training Conference welcomes you to the Verification in 2017-18 Conflicting Information, Identification, and Resolution General Session. Now, please welcome to the stage Jeff Baker, Director of the Policy Liaison and Implementation Group for Federal Student Aid, and Carney McCullough, Director of the Policy Development Group for the Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Yeah, you should tell them.
Good morning. Crowds cleared out a little bit from the general session. Thank you for coming to hear our verification and conflicting information session this morning. Won't be having my colleague up here next year with me, but so I'm going to start off and cover the verification portion and then let Jeff talk about conflicting information, our favorite 399 code. So a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to give an overview of verification and then talk about the things that are specific to 2017-18, and then going to cover like three what I call hot topics, for lack of a better word, dealing with the IRS Get Transcript Online, V4 and V5 reporting, and also changes to verification tracking groups. So a little overview. I always like to give a little history. I've been around a long time, and I think it kind of puts a little of this in perspective. What we call the new regulations went into effect for the 2012-2013 award year. You may recall that prior to that, really we'd had the same regulations in place since like 1985. So I guess these still seem sort of new when you compare it to that. But our whole idea when we wrote the new regulations was that we wanted to target verification to selected applicants and also to maybe specific items for those particular applicants. And we're trying to move towards that as we do things. And we also assured people, and I think they were a little concerned, that we would use data to drive decisions about who to select for verification, what items to select, and those types of things. And hopefully I'll kind of, giving you a little of the history, you'll see how we've been using data to make some of the decisions over the last couple of years. So 2012-13, they went into effect, and you didn't see much of a change that year. We kept what I call the long-standing 5 items, you know, AGI, taxes paid, household size, number in college, and other untaxed income and benefits, I think. We added SNAP and we added child support paid for the 2012-13 year as data elements, not groups. In 2013-14, that's the first time we had verification groups. We came up with this idea that really certain things were inextricably linked together. Like we were never probably going to ask somebody to verify AGI and not ask them to verify taxes paid. And so we decided we would come up with this concept of groups and group certain items together. And we added a couple of new items that year. We also added the idea of high school completion and identity/statement of educational purpose in 2013-14. In 2014-15, you saw the first use of sort of data to make a decision to eliminate a group, and that was the SNAP verification group. We found that as a separate group, we really weren't getting corrections like we thought we might. We weren't seeing differences. We were putting people through paces they didn't need to go through. So we eliminated that as a group for 2014-15. But at the same time, we added a new group, the V6 group, to address concerns that we had been hearing from the financial aid community about people with particularly low income, really low income that didn't seem to support the family size. And so we also correspondingly added untaxed income and benefits as a verification item for that particular group. Then in 2015-16, I loved the year I got to come and talk about that. So we didn't make any changes, and I got like this almost standing ovation for not making changes.
But then,
you know, could live 2016-17. Well, we didn't make any changes to the data elements. They've been pretty constant now for a couple of years. But we did make some clarifications to acceptable documentation, and we eliminated another tracking group. After several years of data on the V3 child support paid tracking group, we decided again we were going to eliminate that as a separate group. And for the first time for 16-17, a verification tracking group could change. Now, of course, it's only changing one way, and that's from any other group to a V5. That's the only type of change that they could do. Okay, so now here we are now looking forward to 17-18, and so I'm going to spend more time talking about that. So the good news is we didn't add any new verification items for 2017-18. I should also say, just sort of leading this off, with prior year early FAFSA, we're expecting fewer applicants to actually be selected for verification. So that should be good news, and I think people should like that. That should give me a little applause. Okay. So we didn't add any new items. Instead, we removed 3 items. We removed the other untaxed income and benefits. We removed SNAP as a verification item. We'd removed the group for SNAP and child support paid before, but we'd kept the items for people who were still in groups V1 and V5 and V6. We removed all of those particular data elements. And along with having removed the other untaxed income and benefits group, we eliminated the household resources tracking group V6. And again, this is another one of those things where on one hand, we had heard concerns from the community that there were concerns that there were people that had too low of an income. And on the other side of the equation, we heard from people that were really hassling very low income people to make them prove yet again that they are poor. And so after a couple of years of data analysis, we are agreeing with the group that says we were hassling poor people to prove that they're poor. So we eliminated that tracking group. So what we have now is we have 3 groups that are reserved, V2, V3, and V6, or another way of putting it is we have 3 active groups. That's V1, V4, and V5. So there are only 3 tracking groups at this point. Now, for acceptable documentation, since we're moving to prior year, which results in using the same base year income of 2015 for both award years, if your institution verified certain items in 2016-17 that are going to be the same for 17-18, you can use that same documentation for those particular items. And so for tax filers, it's basically your income and taxes paid for 2015. So it's these items. It's the AGI, it's the income tax paid, the untaxed portions of IRA distributions, untaxed portions of pensions, IRA deductions and payments, tax-exempt interest income, and education credits. And for non-filers, it's income earned from work. And just making another argument here, sometimes people think they have to verify income earned from work for tax filers. They do not. So I just point that out again. Now, all applicants will have to, if, for example, you verified high school completion status in a prior year, you do not have to collect documentation for that item again. You can use that. Now, you're going to have to obtain new documentation each year for certain items. For a number of household and number in college, anybody who's in a V1 or a V5 group, you will have to get new information about that, because remember, household size is something that changes. It's as of the time somebody completes the application, who they're projecting is going to be in their household in 2017-18, and the number that they're projecting that are in college. And also you have to get a new proof of identity, statement of educational purpose for people who are in V4 or V5. So a couple of revisions and clarifications to acceptable documentation, and this is the one that we get a lot of talk about, which is that we're asking that you get confirmation of non-filing for non-tax filers, and also for tax filers who received a tax filing extension and still have not filed. This confirmation can be obtained from the IRS. You can do it sometimes by using the Get Transcript online, or also by submitting the Form 4506T and checking box 7 on that. And there are also other documents that the IRS may be able to provide that prove that the student was, student's parents, spouse, were a non-tax filer, as long as the tax year and the individual identifiers are on that. You can accept that information. We've gotten a lot of comments about this. This has been our most controversial item, I think, for this year. And I guess one thing is that with the move to prior year, almost everybody who is going to file their tax return will have filed. But in past years, our analysis had shown that there was a pretty significant number of people who indicated on their FAFSA that they were not going to file a tax return, who in fact did. This is a post-award year check that we're able to do. And so given a number of things and program integrity concerns, we thought it's really important to confirm that people truly have not filed their income tax return. We had a conversation the other day with our colleagues in the IRS, and I asked this question because I was very curious. People who file a tax, an extension, for the automatic 6-month extension, about 6% of tax filers do file for that automatic extension, but after the 6 months is up, which is in October, only 0.02% ask for another extension. So it's a really small number. So I think it is safe to say that most everybody will have filed their taxes by the time they're completing their FAFSA. So, and again, we know this is something that people are very concerned about. We're going to analyze the data like we've been doing in the past and see whether we want to make any changes. One concern we've heard, for example, is dependent students are sometimes non-tax filers, and you have to collect proof of that. So we will analyze the data we have and make decisions going forward on that. But for 17-18, and the good news is for those who are filing now and also I should also point out, there's some people that have misinterpreted this to think that everybody has to get a statement of non-titling. No, these are just people who've been selected for verification. So don't think you have to get it for everyone. That was a little bit of misinformation, I think, that was floating around out there. Okay. More information on acceptable documentation. 2 things on high school completion status, one that's on the slide and one that is not. We announced this about a year ago, I think, that if you have someone who is formerly in the military and they're unable to obtain documentation of their high school completion, you can accept as an alternative the DD2 Form 214 that indicates the individual is a high school graduate or its equivalent. Also, and this will be going up on our program integrity questions and answers shortly, if you've got a graduate student that happens to be selected for V4 or V5, you do not have to collect proof of high school completion for that student if admission into the graduate program requires the completion of at least 2 years of undergraduate coursework. So that will be posted shortly. And I listed here a couple of the most significant references and resources for you for verification for 2017-18. The first is our annual Federal Register notice, which we're required to publish by law, which we published early in April of 2016. And then along with it, we have our companion Dear Colleague letter Gen 1607, that sort of translates that Federal Register notice into plain English for you. And so those are the 2 most significant documents. We also published our suggested verification text and an electronic announcement that was posted back in July, on July the 29th. And the application and verification guide was posted last week. So that is up and available to you, a wonderful resource there. And we do continue, as we get frequently asked questions, to post Q's and A's to the Program Integrity website, and we usually issue an electronic announcement telling you there are new questions there. So we'll continue that practice as well. On to the hot topics. So, IRS Get Transcript Online. You may recall it was down for a while. We were very excited about it, and then the IRS had to take it down because there were some very serious security concerns there. And they relaunched it on June the 7th. And of course, that tool allows the user to immediately receive an online PDF version of the IRS tax return transcript. They can also get the verification of non-filing using this particular tool. But the new tool uses a new enhanced 2-step multi-factor authentication process and requires the user to register before they submit a request. And to use the tool, the user has to have a valid email address, and they have to have a text-enabled mobile phone. So one of the pay-as-you-go types of phones will not work for this purpose. You have to have a text-enabled mobile phone. The user also has to have specific financial account numbers, such as a credit card, a mortgage account, an auto loan account. If they don't have one of those, they will not be able to use it. So there are some people that are not able to use this Get Transcript online. The IRS then sends the user a confirmation code via email, and an authentication code via text, which they need to use to complete their registration and be able to get the PDF version that I'm talking about. Now, if they're unable to register using this, they can still submit a request online or by phone or by paper for a tax return transcript to be sent through the mail, or they can use the paper 4506T EZ or 4506T. And all of this information is available in an electronic announcement that we posted back July the 26th. So V4 and V5 reporting. We began asking you to report the results of V4 and V5 applicants with respect to their completion of verification of completion of high school and also the confirmation of their identity back with the 2014-2015 processing year. And we recently issued an electronic announcement there on November the 18th, so some of this is old news, but we remind you that you are supposed to report this information no more than 60 days following the first time you're requesting the information for identity or high school completion status. And we also remind you that you need to update that status if it changes. So if you send the student a request and they just ignore you because they had decided they weren't coming to your school and then they said, oh, yes, I am, and they provide you with the documentation, we ask that you update because we're using this data in our models to try to select the correct people. I also want to remind you you're only reporting for the CPS selected applicants in V4 and V5. And what we have done that's new for 2017-18 is we added a new reporting value, and that's the value of 6. And that addresses the overlap where we had you selecting 3 before when you had a person that there were issues with both the identity and the high school completion status. So now there's a new value 6. And as indicated there, the electronic announcement was posted on November 18th, so you can go there for additional information. Okay, we issued an electronic announcement back on Halloween. Didn't realize that was the date. How interesting. Okay, we developed this basically in response to a lot of questions that we've been getting, and we tried to do this in a handy-dandy chart format. Of course, today on the slides, you're not going to see it in chart format. You're going to get it more text version, but you want to go back and look at this electronic announcement. And this guidance applies to 2016-17 and subsequent award years. And basically what it says is, in general, whether a student is selected for verification initially or whether they're selected on a subsequent transaction, the student has to complete verification of the information that's required for the current verification tracking group. So they have to do that. Information, if somebody has changed tracking groups and they have previously verified some of the information, let's say they're going from a V1 to a V5, they don't have to re-verify the information. Say they had completed verification for V1, right? And so you collected all that information on income information, you had collected household size, you had collected number in college if appropriate. You don't have to re-verify that. You then just have to collect the items that were not previously verified for that student. Now, V5 is unique, as we know, and it's really about the student's identity. And so if somebody fails to complete verification, in most cases, the student is going to have to repay any Title IV-A that was dispersed. Now, notice there I say the student. It's not an institutional liability. It would be a student liability if a student moves to V5 and does not complete that. So if after verification is completed, there is an overpayment, once again, it's a student liability, not an institutional liability. So let's kind of walk through the categories on the first two on the charts. The first one is talking about individuals that were not initially selected for verification on their first or second transaction, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, they're selected on for a V1 or a V6 for 16-17. Now, until you complete verification for that particular applicant, for that student, you cannot disperse any more Title IV-A to that student. You would have to cease work-study employment and not make any additional disbursements to Title IV-A, except we said on a case-by-case basis, you could disperse direct unsubsidized loans and direct plus loans if you think there's going to be a delay in completing verification, and if there's not something else that's making you think there's going to be a problem there, you can make an additional disbursement. Now, if the student does not complete verification, the student has to return all the Title IV grant money they received and any Perkins loan funds that they received. But direct unsubsidized, direct subsidized, and direct plus loans, and obviously federal work-study wages that were earned before you cut them off do not have to be returned. So that's what happens with those individuals. Now, if you have a student that was these are like two categories. They were not selected initially, and then they are selected for V4 or V5. Or they were previously selected for V1, V4, or V6, and they've moved to a V5 verification. Until verification is complete, for those individuals, you cannot make any disbursements of any Title IV funds, including direct unsubsidized and direct plus loans. So no Title IV, everything stops. And like I said, that's really because this is a question about somebody's identity. We're concerned that that student is not who they say they are. And if you think about it, it's really more of a student eligibility issue at that point, almost than a verification issue. You're not really sure that you've got an eligible student, so you have to cut off any Title IV aid and not make any additional disbursements. Now, for those individuals, if verification is never completed or the student fails to verify their identity or high school completion status, they have to return all of the Title IV aid, including direct unsubsidized, subsidized, and plus loans. We don't let them pay them back on their regular basis there. Obviously, they do not return any federal work-study wages because they have earned those. And this last bullet about the requirement for the student to return funds applies regardless of whether the student is still enrolled at the time that they have to return them. So in other words, the student's selected while they're enrolled at your institution and they don't complete verification, they're still going to have to return the money to the programs. Now, once verification is complete for both of those groups of people that I talked about, or I guess 3 groups of people, if there's no change to the EFC, obviously the student can receive all the Title IV aid for which they're eligible. They can be employed under federal work study, and they continue along. If the EFC is decreased, meaning they're eligible now for more money, all aid for the award year needs to be based on the new EFC. And you would make additional disbursements. And if for some reason the student's no longer at your institution, then the disbursements would be consistent with any late disbursement rules if they're applicable. And if the EFC were to increase, meaning decreased eligibility, obviously all awards, disbursements, and work study have to be based on the verified higher EFC, and that could end up resulting in an overpayment of Title IV grants and Perkins loans. And you would follow the normal rules for resolving any overpayments, including being able to make adjustments to upcoming disbursements to resolve those overpayments. And with that.
Thanks, Carney. So conflicting information, I covered a little bit of this morning, but we'll take it just a little slower and a little bit more detail to provide you with information. We issued this Dear Colleague Letter 16-14 in August. And like the gainful employment that I mentioned, there is a number on our IFAP website, a number of electronic announcements, questions and answers, some webinars, including and presentations, including this one will be up after our conference. So these are the things we're going to talk about, these 5 things. In terms of reducing the likelihood, here's the issue, well, before that, sorry. Here's the issue, which I think you're all aware of. We have this odd, one-time only situation, where as we move from prior year to prior year, we have 2 FAFSA years, 2 award years, where eligibility is based upon the same income information, 2015. That chart I showed earlier showed that. Because of that, it's supposed to be the same. There's a possibility that it's not the same and that there's conflicting information. We have regulations, these are in your PPA requirements, that you must resolve any conflicting information that you have. And of course, I hope you all agree, the last bullet, that student aid, federal student aid, should be based upon correct information. We knew, though, that there were could be some significant concerns here, significant numbers, and we wanted to see what we could do to reduce the likelihood that schools would have to take some measures and that students might have to provide some documentation and, in the worst case, return some information. So we thought about how can we reduce the likelihood that this will even happen on this one-year basis. The first thing is, if the student or parent uses the IRS DRT for both years, 16-17 and the 17-18, they'll be able to avoid this because they'll be getting the same tax information. A little bit more on that. Sorry, let me go back here. Now remember, you can, many parents and students may not have used the DRT when they filled out the 16-17 FAFSA because they hadn't filed their taxes yet last January or even later. But they can go back and, using the correction process, use the IRS DRT for 16-17. That will result in two things. One is it will confirm the information that they already provided or correct it, and it should be correct. It's supposed to be correct information under our statute and our regulations. The other thing, of course, it does, if they use the if they use the DRT for 17-18, and in almost all cases no money had been dispersed yet, then the two together should dramatically reduce the likelihood of conflicting information even occurring. But even with that, we've added something which I'm calling these real-time warnings. When an applicant is, or the parent, is completing the 17-18 FAFSA and they get to the point where they didn't use the DRT, they're filling in the information on income, or it's one of the items that doesn't come from the IRS, our system will look to see if there's a prior 16-17 ISER record, CPS record, and if there is, we'll warn the student and the applicant right on the FAFSA on the web session that, and I don't know the exact, I don't remember the exact words, but it says you just entered an amount that is more than a little different from prior year. Check it to make sure you did it right. And what we're hopeful this will do is resolve a problem we're all a little nervous about, is that people who are filling out FAFSAs now, they're probably using the DRT, or they're reading our messages and they're using their 2015 tax return information. But once we turn the first of the year, and as people begin to file their 2016 taxes, we're afraid that some of them will use the 2016 tax return. And this will hopefully protect against that. Now, the DRT using for both years should dramatically reduce the problem, as should this. But nothing's perfect. We have 20 million applicants. I jumped ahead, I'm sorry. These warnings, while they're in there, will occur if there's been a change. It will not occur if estimated taxes were used, estimated income, if the dependency status changed, if marital status changed, because obviously those amounts are different and should be different, so we don't worry about that. But even if those things don't work, then we said, well, what can we do so we don't have to have all of our schools check all of the ISERs that they receive for 17-18, look to see if there's a 16-17, look to see if the dependency status didn't change or marital status didn't change, and the schools would have to compare every item, every income item. So we can't do that. And then we said further, maybe, so our systems can do that and determine if there's any conflicting information. But then we took it a little bit further, and I think this will work, is that we're going to, even though this conflicting information technically should be fixed for either year, but if it doesn't matter, if the result of that doesn't matter, why bother going through all of this process? And we were able to convince some other folks that the doesn't matter is a very broad term. And my little speech on this is that we all know, and everybody really knows, that EFC formulas are not science. A few points below somebody else doesn't mean that family is really less, is more poor, or the other one is more better off. It's all kind of political or rationing or budgetary. It's old, and it is what it is. So we're not talking about a situation where someone would go from not Pell eligible, because they had a very high income, letting it go and they'll get a Pell Grant. We're talking about small ranges within generally the Pell Grant eligibility. That's what we're going to do. We're going to look to see if there's conflicting information between the 2 years, compare the two of them. We don't compare EFCs. because all other things change in EFC, number of household, number of college, assets, the formulas, they all change. We have behind the scenes a process where we calculate the 17-18 EFC, then we take the data from the 16-17 application and run it through that same 17-18 need analysis with the number of household, number of college, and assets, and then we compare EFCs, and then we see does it matter? Is it above a certain threshold? Of which, of course, we're not going to share with you what that threshold is. If there's a difference and it matters, then we're going to flag the 17-18 record with the Common Code 399. Now, neither Carney nor I got to choose the 399. It was our colleagues in our systems area, because had they asked us, we would have said, please use 666. We won't do this review if the student is not expected to be Pell Grant eligible for 17-18. Now let me expand on that just a little bit. We were focusing on Pell Grant, and I know that there could be somebody who we don't catch not being a very nice word, and they get a little bit more subsidized loan or a little bit more campus-based aid, but this is one time only. We don't want to drive you and your students and your parents nuts. It's the Pell Grant program that we're focusing on. But we didn't want to have a situation where somebody's 17-18 EFC was just over the Pell eligible EFC, but maybe resolving this conflicting information would make that person Pell eligible. So we did say in our Dear Colleague letter, as this one says, not expected to be Pell Grant eligible, but we actually went a little bit further on that. So there's a little bit of a range. Again, we won't tell you what that range is, but it's a bit higher than the maximum Pell Grant eligible. In fact, at the time we did this, we didn't know what the maximum Pell Grant eligibility was, so we gave an estimate. The other thing, which is not on this slide, which we put a Q&A out, I think, recently, is about graduate students. Now, the question was, why are graduate students getting a 399? Well, because we don't know if they're really going to be a graduate student or not, just because they checked it on their FAFSA. You all know there's a number, most of them are, and will be, but there are cases when they're not. So what our guidance says is, even if there's a 399, but if the student really is at your school, not on the FAFSA, but in your admissions or enrollment records, is going to be a graduate student, and they did not receive or will not receive federal work-study funds, because work-study is a need-based program, and this is important, then you don't have to worry about it. So the 390, we clearly are flagging some people with 399 that you or your system have to do a little bit of looking at and say, I don't have to mess with this. Obviously, we're not going to do this comparison if there's been a change in students' dependency status, students' or parents' marital status, or if professional judgment was performed in either year. I'll talk a little bit, we put an electronic announcement out saying we had a little glitch on the professional judgment, and we're fixing that. So if you run across one where professional judgment was performed in either year, and you still got a 399, that pretty much resolves that problem. If you get a 399, and other these couple of exceptions that I mentioned, it has to be resolved. It has to be resolved. But these will be few and far between, we hope. I know Lisa and Misty are going to have some statistics tomorrow, but I'll give you a little bit more up to date. We've processed around 3.5 million FAFSAs in the first 6 or 7 weeks since October 1st, which is really great. We have fewer than 100,000 when selected with the 399. That's less than 3%. We're hoping it stays in the single digits. We watch it every couple of weeks. But while this is a big deal when it happens, because it's a lot of work, because of the fact that many families do it right, or they use a DRT, or the warnings help, or our tolerances, it's well within the range that we feel comfortable that we didn't overdo it here. Very important, if the 399 is not on the 17-18 ISER, you don't have to worry about whether there's conflicting information on income and tax items. So even though depending upon your systems, maybe you have them, or you have both files open electronically or otherwise, and you look at it and you say, I don't know, this guy reported, make a number here, $27,800 as their AGI, as their 2015 AGI for 16-17, but on the 17-18 ICER, they put 27,012 or something. Even though there's conflicting information, and without this special guidance here, you'd have to resolve that. You do not have to if there's no 399. Now, you do have to remember anything else, normal rules about conflicting information that you discover, you have to resolve, and we haven't changed any of that. It's just this income between the 2 years because of this special situation, okay? So what do you do if there's a 399 and it doesn't make all these exceptions and so on? Well, you have to review. Now you have to, either your computers or a third party, or you do it by hand or whatever, and we apologize for this, but you have to compare the information. You know something is wrong, and by more than a little. And don't compare EFCs, but the data itself. And you'll see where the data are different between one or more items of their complement in the other year. It will be more than a little bit. It will be more, even individual items will be more, when they're different, they'll be more than a little bit. You have to determine which is correct, because there can only be one correct answer. It's 2015 AGI, or 2015 taxes paid, or the other items. If you had verified one of the years, and that would probably be 16-17, because we're well into the processing year, or the student used or parent used the data retrieval tool for that year, and you have no other reason to think that there's something else going on, you make the corrections in the other year based upon those verification documents or the DRT from the year that they used it, and that's the resolution. You'll get a new, submit them using corrections, however you do that at your campus. You'll get a new ICER, the student will get a new student aid report, and you'll use the new ICER, make sure it's correct, and that'll be the one. And if you've done it correctly, the 399 will go away. The 399 will go away. Now there's an exception, because we didn't want to make it too easy. Actually, we were asked this, some of these exceptions, and we apologize, this is what it is, we probably should have thought these through and included them in the original letter, but it was folks like you and your colleagues that brought these things up. So this is about if you know, and we put this out on a question and answer, if you know that an amended tax return was filed after you verified something, or actually in any case, and that's if you know, and you may not know. In many cases, you don't know. But if you know, you have to make sure that both amended 2015 tax return, you have to make sure that both years use the correct data, use the correct information. And you'll hear more about that a little bit tomorrow. So what do you do if you make these corrections because one or either of the years, it's possible both years, have corrections that need to be made? Well, we have to worry about disbursements and overpayments. If you don't, until you reach resolution, and if you don't reach resolution, you have to hold all 17-18 aid. This is if you don't get resolution. You've reached out to the family and they have not responded. You can award, but you can't disperse 17-18 aid. And you'd stop 16-17 aid until you resolved it. And if it wasn't resolved, the student repays all of the need-based aid, which is the Title IV grants, Perkins, and no more disbursement of work study. Now this is pretty draconian, but we've got a situation here where the family was supposed to fill it out accurately for both years. We gave them opportunities using the DRT. We gave them warnings on the FAFSA. We were very generous in the tolerances. You reached out to them to ask them to provide documentation as to why the years were different, and they haven't done anything. And so until we know better, they receive need-based aid that they were not eligible for, and it goes into repayment. If the correction is to the 17-18, then obviously you use that for the awarding, and presumably you would not have done any disbursements because you're doing this before you disperse for 17-18. But it could be we're already well into 16-17, and in another semester-based schools in another month and a half or so, you'll be making spring disbursements, and we could have a problem. Similar to what Carney mentioned about verification, if the result of your resolving the conflicting information is a change is changes to 1617, and that lowers the student's expected family contribution, then there might be more eligibility. There might be more eligibility. And so the student needs to be awarded 1617 aid based upon the correct EFC after you resolve the information. And as she said early on verification, it could be if the student has left school that you need to make a late disbursement, but we have rules about late disbursement in there, and you see the reg site there, 668-164J. But if it turns out that 1617, after resolving the conflict, the EFC is higher, meaning less eligibility, then you have to determine the student's eligibility based upon the corrected EFC, and that could, in some circumstances, result in an overaward. So what do you do if you have an overaward? The first thing you do, and a lot of people forget about this, is you look to see if you can make an adjustment in an upcoming disbursement. So this would definitely be the case for schools who are resolving 399s, have started resolving them, are resolving them now, maybe even into January, and they put a hold on the 16-17 winter or spring disbursement, or at a clock hour school, the upcoming disbursement. And once you get the new EFC and see what the student is eligible for, you make an adjustment so that for the award year, they're not over-awarded. And you can make an adjustment in the subsequent disbursement or disbursements. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes the eligibility is reduced so much that there is, not only is there no spring disbursement or subsequent disbursement coming, but the fall disbursement was too much, in which case there could be overpayments. Okay? Or the other side is this popped up after you had already made second and subsequent disbursements. There are no further disbursements to adjust. Now you have to see there could be overpayments required. For the Title IV grants, Pell, FSEOG, Iraq-Afghanistan Service Grant, and TEACH grants, if they weren't eligible for all of that, they must repay the aid for which it was dispersed, and for Perkins loans, because Perkins loan is a need-based program. You are not liable. It's the student. And I know that's easier for me to say and a hard message for you to sit down with students and families and tell them this. But again, they misreported back in 16-17, and we discovered it. And the integrity of the programs is somewhat at stake here. All of the information about overpayments are provided in our Federal Student Aid Handbook, and as you know, you can inform the applicant that she or he owes the money back. They can pay it back immediately, in which case you use, for the case of subsidized loans and the grants, you use the COD system to kind of do the downward adjustments. If it's Perkins, you just put it back in your account and reverse the loan. If the person could enter into an agreement with you on a repayment agreement, that's part of our normal overpayment. We use that for return of Title IV aid. But in any event, you can choose to refer the overpayment to the department. There's a couple of ways you do that, a couple of things you have to do. One is there's a process that's also in the handbook in this chapter about how to do that, but you also have to go into NSLDS and indicate that there's an overpayment. Because until it's resolved or satisfactory arrangements have been made to repay, the student is not eligible for any more Title IV aid. Now again, this sounds really heavy and so on, but we think the numbers are going to be very small, and hopefully they will be at each of your colleges. I actually made an error, I think. Subsidized grants, Title IV grants, and Perkins have to be repaid immediately. Subsidized loans do not. It's like return of Title IV aid. They'll get paid normally. And, of course, the same thing for unsub and plus. They'll get paid normally. Now, don't get confused. There were a couple of places in Carney's, particularly about people in V4 and V5, where identity is at stake, or high school completion. There, unless it's resolved, the person is not, we assume that they're not who they say they are, or they didn't meet the high school completion requirement. So they are responsible for all aid, including unsub. Here, since this is a need-based issue, it's only the subsidized aid, and we went back and forth and decided to put the subsidized loans in the same category that we do for return of Title IV aid. Just make sure that you note it. And of course, work study never has to be repaid because it was earned. Applicability of ISER. So this has come up a little bit. You may get a 1718 ISER with a 399 code, but you never got a 1617 ISER because the student just listed you for the first time. They listed some other school last year. Then there's nothing for you to resolve because there's no conflicting information that you have. We have a little bit conflicting information in our system, but you don't have conflicting information, so you can ignore that. We've been asked of why can't we figure that out and not tag them with the 399? Because we don't know what schools the student is actually going to. We just know which ones they listed on the ISER, and that can change. You also don't have to resolve it if you received a 1617 ISER, but you did not and will not disperse any Title IV aid based on either of the ISERs. On either of the ISERs. You might have received a 1617 and the student didn't come to your school, or for any other reason didn't get any financial aid, Title IV aid, and even though they put you down for 1718, they're not going to come to your school. Then you don't have to resolve a conflict that's not going to affect an award from either year. Now, particularly at the end of this year, and when you get to 1718, if this is the case, that's fine. You don't have to resolve it, but you have to have a mechanism to track in case the student decides, no, I really would like to come to your school for 1718. Then you're back that you have to resolve it. You must resolve if you received the 1617 and you dispersed, or you might disperse 1617 aid, even if you're not going to disperse 1718. This is a situation where the student put your school down in 1617 and 1718. You dispersed aid, or you will disperse aid, and he also included you on 1718, but somehow or another, you know that he's not coming to your school for 1718. You still have to resolve this because you might have overpaid him or underpaid him for 1617. And this one was a little bit difficult, but we had to go this way. You have to resolve it if you received a 1617, but you did not either review or process it, and the institution did not disperse. And you're not going to disperse in 1718. This is a situation where schools sometimes, they draw down their ISERs from the SAIG mailbox and they put them in whatever you call it, some kind of holding file, and don't even bring it up to your system until the student has applied for admission or been admitted or enrolled or whatever. That's fine. It's a waste of time to spend a lot of time on that ISER if the kid's not coming to your school. But that doesn't solve this problem. If you did disperse for 1718, or you may disperse for 1718, it's the flip side, then you have to dig up that 1617 ISER, do the comparison, see what's wrong, resolve whichever year, and make the appropriate adjustments. A little bit more, I mentioned some exceptions. So these 3 electronic announcements. One was we had to reprocess a relatively small number of ISERs where we had a couple of glitches. The professional judgment was one. There's a little adjustment needs to be made on people who had automatic zero EFC. We put an electronic announcement out saying that we reprocessed or will be reprocessing those. October 21st, we put out an electronic announcement that talked about the graduate students and the professional judgment that I mentioned. And then this one came up about schools that apparently, in getting their systems, whether they use a third-party servicer or their own, while some of their students may have completed their FAFSAs in October, November, December, whenever, and we put the ISERs in their mailbox, the schools aren't ready to import them, or whatever term they use, into their systems. So what we said is, in this electronic announcement, if the only reason that you're not looking at these 1718 ISERs early is that your system is not ready to import them, and not just because you don't feel like looking at them or you don't have the time to look at them, it's because your system isn't ready, and we expect these systems to be ready pretty promptly. You don't have to put a hold on 1617 aid. You can continue to disperse it. Normally, when you see this 399, you have to stop everything until you resolve it. But this allows you to continue. But if you do that, and it turns out that there's a problem with 1617, and it could require more repayment by the student. And that's just the territory that it comes in. Okay? I think the issue is that if you're not looking at the ISERs because you haven't imported them yet, you don't, even if you're down to the 1%, 2%, or 3%, you don't know which ones those are, and you don't want to hold aid for all of them when maybe there's a problem with a very, very few. So that's up to you to decide to do that, but of those very few, if it turns out that the conflicting information results in a change in 1617, you could have a little bit of an issue. And that just went up a couple of weeks ago. Then we did a series of questions and answers. This was the question about what happens if the student's no longer enrolled for 1617 or won't enroll in 1718. You're not required to resolve the conflicting information if they're no longer. It's like verification. Our verification, if someone gets selected for verification after they're no longer enrolled, you don't have to resolve this. And we put that out in this Q&A number 12. Number 13 was our attempt to resolve the question about the graduates, not the graduates, the Pell eligible that includes an EFC a bit higher, the dependency status with professional judgment. And to state clearly about this not result in a significant change in the student's EFC. So it was just a little clarification. We put all of that out in a Dear Colleague letter, but we got a number of questions coming in on our mailbox, so we thought, well, let's put it out again just to make sure, but there's nothing really surprising on this one. And this also, we kept getting this question of the relationship between verification and 399. There is no relationship or very little relationship. The question we got asked by more than one school was, I have a student who got a 399, but they weren't selected for verification, so I don't have to do anything, right? Wrong. Okay. You have to resolve the conflicting information. Now, you don't have to do the other stuff that verification might require, like verifying number, household number, college, and that kind of stuff. But this is to clarify that. We put that up a while ago. This is about if they did verify in either year, can you assume that it's correct? And this I mentioned earlier. If they use the DRT or they verified from 1617, you can go make the changes in 1718 and let that one flow through. But remember, there's the exception for an amended tax return. A question came up about, can I resolve or should I resolve this? I'm going to do professional judgment. So why do I have to resolve the 399 when I'm going to do professional judgment? Because I've got enough evidence that the student's parents lost their job or somebody died or something. No, it's like verification. You get the numbers right. You do the conflicting verification resolution, fix whatever you need to fix, and then consider professional judgment. Okay? And our argument for that is twofold. One is we use the data on professional judgment, other things, in all of our risk assessments, all the things that Carney mentioned about, we use data to decide tracking groups and these kinds of things. Also, we think that before you make a decision to change something, you need to know what you're changing it from, the correct data that you're changing it from. So you have to do your resolving conflicting information before you do professional judgment. And this was a strange question too. People wanted to know if they do a 399 resolution, do they have to use the new one for aid? And we didn't quite get it, but we repeated. The required comparison must be between 1718 ICER with 399 and the 1617 that was or will be used as a basis for awarding aid. You have to do that kind of thing there. Again, some of these questions we thought we had made it clear in the letter, but it doesn't hurt to put them out a little bit more. So this question comes up about how do I make the 399 code go away? And will they show up on a 1617 ICER? And if I make a change to 1617, will the 399 go away? And all of this stuff. So what this tries to explain is that we only put the 399 on 1718 ICERs, and only if there's a conflict. If there are corrections made to 1617 that resolve the conflict, the 399 will go away only when there's another 1718 being produced. So let me explain that a little bit. You go through this thing, you know, you walk out of here, think we're nuts, but you go ahead and do it, and you make a change to 1617 and you deal with what you have to do for overpayments. Meanwhile, you have a 1718 ICER with a 399 on it. How do you make it go away? It doesn't need to go away because by definition, this example I'm giving you, the 1718 was the correct one. So you award on it and disperse on it. Now, if for any reason a new 17-18 ICER is being produced, we do the comparison, and the 399 may go away at that point on the 17-18. And that's any change. You could change address, you could change number in household, you could change anything, and the 399 is going to go away. But you don't have to wait for it to go away if you're confident that 17-18 was correct. One more thing. If a student filled out a 17-18 FAFSA before they did their 16-17, you'll get a 17-18 FAFSA, obviously with no 399 on it, because we didn't have a record. Then they fill out a 16-17 FAFSA, and they fill out incorrectly or not consistency. What happens? No, you do not get a 17-18 ICER automatically just because they changed or actually submitted a 16-17. But if 17-18 new ICER is created for any reason and that conflict exists, then you'll get a 399. So it's hard to follow, but hopefully in the letter and these Q's and A's and these slides, when you get a chance to look at them, there will be times when a 399 doesn't go away, but you don't have to worry about it because you've resolved it. There will be times when a 399 you resolved and it didn't go away, and then it goes away later because some other reason of a 17-18. There will be times when a 17-18 does not have a 399, but then it comes later because 16-17 was filed or changed rather dramatically, and a 17-18 is produced for some reason. But they won't be produced automatically. They won't be produced automatically. Bottom line on all of that is you are responsible for resolving this if you receive a 17-18 ICER with the 399 code. And if you don't get a 399 code, you don't have to worry about it. And if you get one but then resolved it, you've resolved it and you don't have to worry about it. But you could get some that pop up later during the year. And the question came up about if it turns out in the resolution that 17-18 is correct, but 16-17 is the bad one, but you didn't disperse on it, you don't have to submit corrections because you're done, right? You've resolved it, there's no problem, or there is a problem with 17-18, you fix that, but not with 16-17. So you don't have to do that. And I think our last one, the question came up, I mentioned earlier about adjusting subsequent disbursements. Some schools asked us whether they had to do that or could they just put the student into overpayment and still make the inappropriate, so you know where we're going on this, disbursements. No, you can't disperse Title IV aid to a person who's not eligible for all of that aid. So if there's a subsequent disbursement that has to be reduced or eliminated, you take care of that. I understand the reason. People were thinking, well, you know, she needs the money to pay tuition, to, you know, things for the spring semester. I'll put her into a repayment plan, and that'll be better. Yeah, I get it. But you can't give money to students who are not eligible for it. You just can't do that. This is the last one, I hope. This is about deadlines. Some schools asked us about the deadline. You know, when you send out information saying, however you say it, that you need to provide some documentation of why you reported or your family reported different income information on these two FAFSAs, how much time should you give the student? And frankly, we said, whatever you guys want to do. You know, do the right thing by your students. You also have, you know, there's some restrictions. You got work to do and years come to an end. So we fell back on our guidance for verification. We have these Federal Register notices with all the timelines, and I think basically it says an institutionally established deadline, but no later than the end of the award year. But I think you should be as flexible as possible. Give the students an opportunity to resolve whatever the problem was. And that was the last one. We have these town halls, one this afternoon, and then they moved one on Wednesday, and then I think one on Friday, so I'm sure some of these issues will come up. Thank you very much.